Hello. Welcome to Storytime with Moog. I am Moog, and today we are continuing on with Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, starting with chapter 22. But first, reading updates. I am still reading Witchcraft. I will be finishing it hopefully this weekend. It is an arc. It comes out next Friday, and that is when my review is due. So everything is fine. Everything's fine, but my hope is to finish it this weekend. It's really good. It is a nonfiction story, and it goes through 13 different trials of witchcraft throughout history. It starts very, very early, and it's also throughout the world. So it's not just focusing on the US. There's cases in France, in Scotland, um, people involved from other countries, but are pulled into like the US, like things like that. And it's divided into three sections. The first section focuses on demonology. The second section focuses on just like the doubt and how there's still witch hunts even after the demonology period. And then the third section focuses on North America and South America present-ish day. I don't know how present it's going to be, but we shall see. And it's just enraging. It's just enraging about how many people have been accused, the reasons why they're accused. Um, it's enraging, but it's a very good read. We're pretty far into the book, so let's just go into Wuthering Heights. We are, as I said, about to start chapter 22. There's 34 chapters, so moving right along. We don't have that much to do. We are pretty close to the end. We have this much to go. Not too bad. Let's see what happened last time. Okay, so let's put ourselves in the mindset for Wuthering Heights. The upsetting section of the story. So Isabella, who is Edgar's um, sister and Heathcliff's wife, moved away. And while she is away, she like took her kid with her. And while she is away, she has died. She did rekindle her relationship with Edgar after moving. And so at her death or near the end of her life, Edgar goes to where she is to like tie up loose ends, those sort of things, and also grab her kid, Linton, and bring him home. And the intention is for him to keep Linton and not allow him to go live with Heathcliff, who is his dad. It, okay. It's like so much ick. Um, and while all of this is happening, Kathy, who is Catherine and Edgar's kid, is growing up. She's about the age of 13 and getting more and more curious about her surroundings. She hasn't really explored that far around the house. And when she does explore, she finds Heathcliff and is chatting with him and just like the house. And she learns her cousin, Harriton, lives there and he's kind of mean. And yeah, so then Ellen, who is the person who's telling this whole story, has to explain to Kathy that you know they had a fight, sort of a thing, and that we don't really talk to Heathcliff and we don't really associate with Heathcliff. Linton comes home. Kathy is very excited about this, but in the middle of the night, right when everybody is going to sleep, Joseph, who works at Wuthering Heights with Heathcliff, comes and says, "We need to take Linton. Heathcliff wants Linton back." And Edgar is super upset about this. He is like, the boy just got here. He's frail and weak and really tired from the journey. He's not leaving right now. He's already asleep. I'm not going to wake him up. And so it's decided that the next day, Linton is going to go there. And Edgar's not going to take him because he despises Heathcliff. And it is settled that Ellen is going to take him. So the next day, Ellen wakes Linton up very early in the morning and explains, like, you're going to go live with your dad. Linton's not super excited about it because he didn't even know that he had a dad. His mom never talked about him. and he's just really worried because he wants to stay with his uncle. And so he goes there. They tell Kathy that Linton moved and just let her assume that it's really far away when in fact it's not that far away. And one day, Kathy is exploring and Ellen is close behind, and Kathy runs into Heathcliff and they're having a chat, and Heathcliff is like, "Oh, like my son is actually somebody that you know, and here it is, here he is, it's Linton." And so now Kathy is super upset that Linton has been so close this whole time, and the fact that she hasn't been able to see him or him her is because their parents were fighting. And she's like, "Well, these are my, like, this is the fight between our parents, not between us. We should still be able to talk and hang out and stuff like that." And it's pretty much forbidden, not allowed to do it. So Kathy and Linton have been sending notes back and forth via the milkman. The milkman has been delivering notes between them, and Ellen finds out and threatens to tell Kathy's dad, Edgar, about all of this. And so what ends up happening is that Ellen burns all of the letters, which Kathy is very, very distraught about, and that is where we left off, and where we will be picking up now. All right, so let's do it. Chapter 22. Summer drew to an end, and early autumn. It was past Michaelmas, but the harvest was late that year, and a few of our fields were still uncleared. Mr. Linton and his daughter would frequently walk out among the reapers. At the carrying of the last sheaves, they stayed till dusk, and the evening happening to be chill and damp, my master caught a bad cold that settled obstinately on his lungs and confined him indoors throughout the whole of the winter, nearly without intermission. Poor Kathy, frightened from her little romance, had been considerably sadder and duller since its abandonment, and her father insisted on her reading less and taking more exercise. She had his companionship no longer. I esteemed it a duty to supply its lack as much as possible with mine, an inefficient substitute, for I could only spare 2 or 3 hours from my numerous diurnal occupations to follow her footsteps, and then my society was obviously less desirable than his. On an afternoon in October, or the beginning of November, a fresh watery afternoon, when the turf and paths were rustling with moist, withered leaves, and the cold blue sky was half ridden by clouds, dark gray streamers, rapidly mounting from the west and boding abundant rain, I requested my young lady to forego her ramble, because I was certain of showers. She refused, and I unwillingly donned a cloak and took my umbrella to accompany her on a stroll to the bottom of the park, a formal walk which she generally affected if low-spirited, and that she invariably was when Mr. Edgar had been worse than ordinary, a thing never known from his confession, but guessed both by her and me from his increased silence and the melancholy of his countenance. She went sadly on. There was no running or bounding now, though the chill wind might well have tempted her to race. And often, from the side of my eye, I could detect her raising a hand and brushing something off her cheek. I gazed round for a means of diverting her thoughts. On one side of the road rose a high, rough bank where hazels and stunted oaks, with their roots half exposed, held uncertain tenure. The soil was too loose for the latter, and strong winds had blown some nearly horizontal. In summer, Miss Catherine delighted to climb along those trunks and sit in the branches, swinging 20 feet above the ground, and I, pleased with her agility and her light, childish heart, still considered it proper to scold every time I caught her at such an elevation, but so that she knew there was no necessity for descending. From dinner to tea she would lie in her breeze-rocked cradle, doing nothing except singing old songs, my nursery lore, to herself, or watching the birds, joint tenants, feed and entice their young ones to fly, or nestling with closed lids, half thinking, half dreaming, happier than words can express. "Look, miss," I exclaimed, pointing to a nook under the roots of one twisted tree. "Winter is not here yet. There's a little flower up yonder, the last bud from the multitude of bluebells that clouded those turf steps in July with lilac mist. Will you clamber up and pluck it to show to Papa?" Kathy stared a long time at a lonely blossom trembling in its earthy shelter and replied at length, "No, I'll not touch it, but it looks melancholy. Does it not, Ellen?" "Yes," I observed, "about as starved and sackless as you. Your cheeks are bloodless. Let us take hold out of hands and run. You're so low, I dare say, I shall keep up with you." "No," she repeated, and continued sauntering on, pausing at intervals to muse over a bit of moss, or a tuft of blanched grass, or a fungus spreading its bright orange among the heaps of brown foliage. And ever and anon her hand was lifted to her averted face. "Catherine, why are you crying, love?" I asked, approaching and putting my arm over her shoulder. "You mustn't cry because Papa has a cold. Be thankful it is nothing worse." She now put no further restraint on her tears. Her breath was stifled by sobs. "Oh, it will be something worse," she said. "And what shall I do when Papa and you leave me, and I am by myself? I can't forget your words, Ellen. They are always in my ear. How life will be changed, how dreary the world will be, when Papa and you are dead." "None can tell whether you won't die before us," I replied. "It's wrong to anticipate evil. We'll hope there are years and years to come before any of us go. Master is young, and I am strong, and hardly 45. My mother lived till 80, a canty dame to the last. And suppose Mr. Linton were spared till he saw 60. That would be more years than you have counted, miss. And would it not be foolish to mourn a calamity above 20 years beforehand?" "But Aunt Isabella was younger than Papa," she remarked, gazing up with timid hope to seek further consolation. "Aunt Isabella had not you and me to nurse her," I replied. "She wasn't as happy as Master. She hadn't as much to live for. All you need do is to wait well on your father and cheer him by letting him see you cheerful, and avoid giving him anxiety on any subject. Mind that, Kathy. I'll not disguise, but you might kill him if you are wild and reckless, and cherished a foolish, fanciful affection for the son of a person who would be glad to have him in his grave, and allowed him to discover that you fretted over the separation he has judged it expedient to make." "I fret about nothing on earth except Papa's illness," answered my companion. "I care for nothing in comparison with Papa, and I'll never, never, oh, never, while I have my senses, do an act or say a word to vex him. I love him better than myself, Ellen, and I know it by this. I pray every night that I may live after him, because I would rather be miserable than that he should be. That proves I love him better than myself." "Good words," I replied, "but deeds must prove it also. And after he is well, remember you don't forget resolutions formed in the hour of fear." As we talked, we neared a door that opened on the road, and my young lady, lightening into sunshine again, climbed up, seated herself on the top of the wall, reaching over to gather some hips that bloomed scarlet on the summit branches of the wild rose trees shadowing the highway side. The lower fruit had disappeared, but only birds could touch the upper, except for Kathy's present station. In stretching to pull them, her hat fell off, and as the door was locked, she proposed scrambling down to recover it. I bid her be cautious, lest she got a fall, and she nimbly disappeared. But the return was no such easy matter. The stones were smooth and neatly cemented, and the rose bushes and blackberry stragglers could yield no assistance in reascending. I, like a fool, didn't recollect that, till I heard her laughing and exclaiming, "Ellen, you'll have to fetch the key, or else I must run round the porter's lodge. I can't scale the ramparts on this side." "Stay where you are," I answered. "I have my bundle of keys in my pocket. Perhaps I may manage to open it. If not, I'll go." Catherine amused herself with dancing to and fro before the door while I tried all the large keys in succession. I had applied the last, and found that none would do so. So, repeating my desire that she would remain there, I was about to hurry home as fast as I could, when an approaching sound arrested me. It was the trot of a horse. Kathy's dance stopped also. "Who is that?" I whispered. "Ellen, I wish you could open the door," whispered back my companion anxiously. "Oh, Miss Linton," cried a deep voice, the rider's. "I'm glad to meet you. Don't be in haste to enter, for I have an explanation to ask and obtain." "I shan't speak to you, Mr. Heathcliff," answered Catherine. "Papa says you are a wicked man, and you hate both him and me, and Ellen says the same." "That is nothing to the purpose," said Heathcliff. He it was. "I don't hate my son, I suppose, and it is concerning him that I demand your attention. Yes, you have cause to blush. 2 or 3 months since, were you not in the habit of riding to Linton, making love in play? You deserved, both of you, flogging for that. You, especially the elder, and less sensitive as it turns out. I've got your letters, and if you give me any pertness, I'll send them to your father. I presume you grew weary of the amusement and dropped it, didn't you? Well, you dropped Linton with it into a slough of despond. He was in earnest, in love, really. As true as I live, he's dying for you, breaking his heart at your fickleness, not figuratively, but actually. Though Hareton has made him a standing jest for 6 weeks, and I have used more serious measures and attempted to frighten him out of his idiocy, he gets worse daily, and he'll be under the sod before summer, unless you restore him." "How can you lie so glaringly to the poor child?" I called from the inside. "Pray, write on. How can you deliberately get up such paltry falsehoods? Miss Cathy, I'll knock the lock off with a stone. You won't believe that vile nonsense. You can feel in yourself it is impossible that a person should die for love of a stranger." "I was not aware there were eavesdroppers," muttered the detected villain. "Worthy Mrs. Dean, I like you, but I don't like your double-dealing," he added aloud. "How could you lie so glaringly as to affirm I hated the poor child, and invent bugbear stories to terrify her from my doorsteps? Catherine Linton, the very name warms me, my bonny lass. I shall be from home all this week. Go and see if I have not spoken truth. There's a darling. Just imagine your father in my place, and Linton in yours. Then think how you would value your careless lover if he refused to stir a step to comfort you, when your father himself entreated him, and don't, from pure stupidity, fall into the same error. I swear on my salvation he's going to his grave, and none but you can save him." The lock gave way, and I issued out. "I swear Linton is dying," repeated Heathcliff, looking hard at me, "and grief and disappointment are hastening his death. Nelly, if you won't let her go, you can walk over yourself, but I shall not return till this time next week, and I think your master himself would scarcely object to her visiting her cousin." "Come on," I said, taking Cathy by the arm, and half forcing her to re-enter, for she lingered, viewing with troubled eyes the features of the speaker, too stern to express his inward deceit. He pushed his horse, and, bending down, observed, "Miss Catherine, I own to you that I have little patience with Linton, and Hareton and Joseph have less. I'll own that he's with a harsh set, He pines for kindness as well as love, and a kind word from you would be his best medicine. Don't mind Mrs. Dean's cruel cautions, but be generous and contrive to see him. He dreams of you day and night, and cannot be persuaded that you don't hate him, since you neither write nor call." I closed the door and rolled a stone to assist the loosened lock in holding it, and spreading my umbrella, I drew my charge underneath, for the rain began to drive through the moaning branches of the trees, and warned us to avoid delay. Our hurry prevented any comment on the encounter with Heathcliff as he stretched towards home, but I divined instinctively that Catherine's heart was clouded now in double darkness. Her features were so sad, they did not seem hers. She evidently regarded what she had heard as every syllable true. The master had retired to rest before we came in. Cathy stole to his room to inquire how he was. He had fallen asleep. She returned and asked me to sit with her in the library. We took our tea together, and afterwards she lay down on the rug and told me not to talk, for she was weary. I got a book and pretended to read. As soon as she supposed me absorbed in my occupation, she recommenced her silent weeping. It appeared, at present, her favorite diversion. I suffered her to enjoy it awhile. Then I expostulated, deriding and ridiculing all Mr. Heathcliff's assertions about his son, as if I were certain she would coincide. Alas, I hadn't skill to counteract the effect his account had produced. It was just what he intended. "You may be right, Ellen," she answered, "but I shall never feel at ease till I know, and I must tell Linton it is not my fault that I don't write, and convince him that I shall not change." What use were anger and protestations against her silly credulity? We parted last night, hostile, but next day beheld me on the road to Wuthering Heights, by the side of my wilful young mistress's pony. I couldn't bear to witness her sorrow, to see her pale, dejected countenance and heavy eyes, and I yielded, in the faint hope that Linton himself might prove, by his reception of us, how little of the tale was founded on fact. End of chapter 22. Okay, so this chapter, Edgar is sick, and Cathy is distraught and worried and just thinking about mortality, both her own and that of Ellen and her father, Edgar. And so her dad is like, all right, well, she's in a mood. She needs to stop reading and spending so much time inside. She needs to be outside more. So Ellen is like going outside with her more often, these sorts of things. And while she is outside, she kind of gets stuck. And Heathcliff rides up and is talking to her and just saying how Linton is in so much despair and distraught that he is literally dying and withering away because Cathy is no longer speaking with him through their letters that they were corresponding with, and that he himself, as well as the other people living in Wuthering Heights, are not very nice to him, and it would do him a good deed to have kind words. And so he's also saying, like, I'm going to be gone for a full week, so you don't even have to deal with me. Edgar is not going to be mad about this. And Ellen is there and sort of like talking to Cathy and being like, don't listen to him, he's lying, that sort of thing, like, blah, blah, blah. And Heathcliff is like, okay, well, if Cathy won't go, Ellen, you go. I know that you care for the boy, blah, blah, blah. As I said, I will not be there for 1 week. And so they go back inside, and Edgar is already sleeping, and Cathy just sort of wants a quiet night and doesn't want to talk with Ellen, so Ellen pretends to read a book, and Cathy just slowly or quietly sobs to herself because of the whole ordeal. And that's where chapter 22 ends. So, hold up. We'll sit. Chapter 23. The rainy night had ushered in a misty morning, half frost, half drizzle, and temporary brooks crossed our path, gurgling from the uplands. My feet were thoroughly wetted. I was cross and low, exactly the humor suited for making the most of these disagreeable things. We entered the farmhouse by the kitchen way to ascertain whether Mr. Heathcliff were really absent, because I put slight faith in his own affirmation. Joseph seemed sitting in a sort of Elysium alone, beside a roaring fire, a quart of ale on the table near him, bristling with large pieces of toasted oat cake, and his black, short pipe in his mouth. Catherine ran to the hearth to warm herself. I asked if the master was in. My question remained so long unanswered that I thought the old man had grown deaf, and repeated it louder. "Nay," he snarled, or rather screamed through his nose. "Nay, you nimmer go back where you come from." "Joseph," cried a peevish voice simultaneously with me from the inner room, "how often am I to call you? There are only a few red ashes now. Joseph, come this moment." Vigorous puffs and a resolute stare into the grate declared he had no ear for this appeal. The housekeeper and Hareton were invisible, one gone on an errand, and the other at his work, probably. We knew Linton's tones and entered. "Oh, I hope you'll die in a garret, starved to death," said the boy, mistaking our approach for that of his negligent attendant. He stopped on observing his error. His cousin flew to him. "Is that you, Miss Linton?" he said, raising his head from the arm of the great chair in which he reclined. "No, don't kiss me. It takes my breath. Dear me, Papa said you would call." Continued he, after recovering a little from Catherine's embrace, while she stood by looking very contrite. "Will you shut the door, if you please? You left it open, and those detestable creatures won't bring coals to the fire. It's so cold." I stirred up the cinders, and fetched a scuttleful myself. The invalid complained of being covered with ashes, but he had a tiresome cough, and looked feverish and ill, and so I did not rebuke his temper. "Well, Linton," murmured Catherine, when his corrugated brow relaxed, "are you glad to see me? Can I do you any good?" "Why didn't you come before?" he asked. "You should have come instead of writing. It tired me dreadfully writing those long letters. I'd rather have talked to you. Now I can neither bear to talk, nor anything else. I wonder where Zillah is. Will you," looking at me, "step into the kitchen and see?" I had received no thanks for my other service, and being unwilling to run to and fro at his behest, I replied, "Nobody is out there but Joseph." "I want to drink," he exclaimed fretfully, turning away. "Zillah is constantly gadding off to Gimmerton since Papa went. It's miserable, and I'm obliged to come down here. They resolved never to hear me upstairs." "Is your father attentive to you, Master Heathcliff?" I asked, perceiving Catherine to be checked in her friendly advances. "Attentive! He makes them a little more attentive at least," he cried. "The wretches! Do you know, Miss Linton, that brute Hareton laughs at me? I hate him. Indeed, I hate them all. They are odious beings." Cathy began searching for some water. She lighted on a pitcher in the dresser, filled a tumbler, and brought it. He bid her add a spoonful of wine from the bottle of the table, and having swallowed a small portion, appeared more tranquil, and said she was very kind. "And are you glad to see me?" asked she, reiterating her former question, and pleased to detect the faintest dawn of a smile. "Yes, I am. It's something new to hear a voice like yours," he replied. But I have been vexed, because you wouldn't come, and Papa swore it was owing to me. He called me a pitiful, shuffling, worthless thing, and said you despised me, and if he had been in my place, he would be more the master of the Grange than your father by his time. But you don't despise me, do you, miss? I wish you would say Catherine, or Cathy. Oh, wrong voice. I wish you would say Catherine, or Cathy, interrupted my young lady. Despise you? No, next to Papa and Ellen, I love you better than anything living. I don't love Mr. Heathcliff, though. I dare not come when he returns. Will he stay away many days? Not many, answered Linton, but he goes on to the moors frequently, since the shooting season commenced, and you might spend an hour or two with me in his absence. Do say you will. I think I should not be peevish with you. You'd not provoke me, and you'd always be ready to help me, wouldn't you? Yes, said Catherine, stroking his long, soft hair. If I could only get Papa's consent, I'd spend half my time with you. Pretty Linton, I wish you were my brother. And then you would like me as well as your father, observed he, more cheerfully. But Papa says you would love me better than him, and all the world, if you were my wife. So I'd rather you were that. No, I should never love anybody better than Papa, she retorted gravely. And people hate their wives sometimes, but not their sisters and brothers. And if you were the latter, you would live with us, and Papa would be as fond of you as he is of me. Linton denied that people ever hated their wives, but Cathy affirmed they did, and in her wisdom instanced his own father's aversion to her aunt. I endeavored to stop her thoughtless tongue. I couldn't succeed till everything she knew was out. Master Heathcliff, much irritated, asserted her relation was false. Papa told me, and Papa does not tell falsehoods, she answered pertly. My? Papa scorns yours, answered Linton. He calls him a sneaking fool. Yours is a wicked man, retorted Catherine, and you are very naughty to dare to repeat what he says. You must be wicked to have made Aunt Isabella leave him as she did. Or he must be as wicked. Oopsie, not Linton. Hareton is as wicked. Oh my gosh, Heathcliff. Now I'm just throwing out names. Oopsie. She didn't leave him, said the boy. You shan't contradict me. She did, cried my young lady. Well, I'll tell you something, said Linton. Your mother hated your father. Now then. Oh, exclaimed Catherine, too enraged to continue. And she loved mine, added he. You little liar, I hate you now, she panted, and her face grew red with passion. She did, sang Linton, sinking into the recess of his chair and leaning back his head to enjoy the agitation of the other disputant, who stood behind. Hush, Master Heathcliff, I said. That's your father's tale, too, I suppose. It isn't. You hold your tongue, he answered. She did, Catherine. She did. Cathy, beside herself, gave the chair a violent push, and caused him to fall against one arm. He was immediately seized by a suffocating cough that soon ended his triumph. It lasted so long that it frightened even me. As to his cousin, she wept with all her might, aghast at the mischief she had done, though she said nothing. I held him till the fit exhausted itself. Then he thrust me away, and leant his head down silently. Catherine quelled her lamentations also, took a seat opposite, and looked solemnly into the fire. How do you feel now, Master Heathcliff? I inquired, after waiting 10 minutes. I wish she felt as I do, he replied. Spiteful, cruel thing. Hareton never touches me. He never struck me in his life, and I was better today, and there— His voice died in a whimper. I didn't strike you, muttered Cathy, chewing her lip to prevent another burst of emotion. He sighed, and moaned like one under great suffering, and kept it up for a quarter of an hour. on purpose to distress his cousin, apparently, for whenever she caught a stifled sob from her, he put renewed pain and pathos into the inflections of his voice. "I'm sorry I hurt you, Linton," she said at length, racked beyond endurance. "But I couldn't have been hurt by that little push, and I had no idea that you could either. You're not much, are you, Linton? Don't let me go home thinking I've done you harm. Answer. Speak to me." "I can't speak to you," he murmured. "You've hurt me so that I shall lie awake all night choking with this cough. If you had it, you'd know what it was. But you'll be comfortably asleep while I'm in agony and nobody near me. I wonder how you would like to pass those fearful nights." And he began to wail aloud, for very pity of himself. "Since you are in the habit of passing dreadful nights," I said, "it won't be Miss who spoils your ease. You'll be the same had she never come. However, she shall not disturb you again, and perhaps you'll get quieter when we leave you." "Must I go?" asked Catherine dolefully, bending over him. "Do you want me to go, Linton?" "You can't alter what you've done," he replied pettishly, shrinking from her, "unless you alter it for the worse by teasing me into a fever." "Well, then, I must go," she repeated. "Let me alone, at least," said he. "I can't bear your talking." She lingered, and resisted my persuasions to departure a tiresome while. But as he neither looked up nor spoke, she finally made a movement to the door, and I followed. We were recalled by a scream. Linton had slid from his seat on the hearthstone, and lay writhing in a mere perverseness of an indulged plague of a child, determined to be as grievous and harassing as it can. I thoroughly gauged his disposition from his behavior, and saw at once it would be folly to attempt humoring him. Not so my companion. She ran back in terror, knelt down and cried, and soothed and entreated, till he grew quiet from lack of breath, by no means from compunction at distressing her. "I shall lift him on to the settle," I said, "and he may roll about as he pleases. We can't stop to watch him. I hope you are satisfied, Miss Cathy, that you are not the person to benefit him, and that his condition of health is not occasioned by attachment to you. Now then, there he is. Come away. As soon as he knows there is nobody by to care for his nonsense, he'll be glad to lie still." She placed a cushion under his head and ordered him some water. He rejected the latter, and tossed uneasily on the former as if it were a stone or a block of wood. She tried to put it more comfortably. "I can't do with that," he said. "It's not high enough." Catherine brought another to lay above it. "That's too high," murmured the provoking thing. "How must I arrange it, then?" she asked despairingly. He twined himself up to her, and she half knelt by the settle and converted her shoulder into a support. "No, that won't do," I said. "You'll be content with the cushion, Master Heathcliff. Miss has wasted too much time on you already. We cannot remain 5 minutes longer." Yes, we can," replied Cathy. "He's good and patient now. He's beginning to think I shall have far greater misery than he will tonight. If I believe he is the worse for my visit, then I dare not come again. Tell the truth about it, Linton, for I mustn't come if I have hurt you." "You must come to cure me," he answered. "You ought to come because you have hurt me. You know you have extremely. I was not as ill when you entered as I am at present, was I?" "But you made yourself ill by crying and being in a passion. I didn't do it all," said his cousin. "However, we'll be friends now, and you want me. You would wish to see me sometime, really?" "I told you I did," he replied impatiently. "Sit on the settle and let me lean on your knee. That's as Mamma used to do. Whole afternoons together. Sit quiet, still, and don't talk. But you may sing a song, if you can sing, or you may say a nice, long, interesting ballad. One of those you promised to teach me. Or a story. I'd rather have a ballad, though. Begin. Catherine repeated, the longest she could remember. The employment pleased both mightily. Linton would have another, and after that, another, notwithstanding my strenuous objections. And so they went on until the clock struck 12, and we heard Hareton in the court, returning for his dinner. And tomorrow, Catherine, will you be here tomorrow? Asked young Heathcliff, holding her frock as she rose reluctantly. No, I answered, nor next day neither. She, however, gave a different response, evidently, for his forehead cleared as she stooped and whispered in his ear. You won't go tomorrow, recollect, miss, I commenced, when we were out of the house. You were not dreaming of it, are you? She smiled. Oh, I'll take good care, I answered. I continued. I'll have that lock mended, and you can escape by no way else. I can get over the wall, she said, laughing. The Grange is not a prison, Ellen, and you are not my gaoler. And besides, I'm almost 17. I'm a woman, and I'm certain Linton would recover quickly if he had me to look after him. I'm older than he is, you know, and wiser. Less childish, am I not? And he'll soon do as I direct him, with some slight coaxing. He's a pretty little darling when he's good. I'd make such a pet of him, if he were mine. You should never quarrel. We should never quarrel, should we, after we were used to each other? Don't you like him, Ellen? Like him, I exclaimed. The worst-tempered bit of a sickly slip that ever struggled into its teens. Happily, as Mr. Heathcliff conjectured, he'll not win 20. I doubt whether he'll see spring indeed. And small loss to his family whenever he drops off, and lucky it is for us that his father took him. The kinder he was treated, and the more tedious and selfish he'd be. I'm glad you have no chance of having him for a husband, Miss Catherine. My companion waxed serious at hearing this speech. To speak of his death so regardless wounded her feelings. He's younger than I, she answered, with a protracted pause of meditation, and he ought to live the longest. He will. He must live as long as I do. He's as strong now as when he first came into the north. I'm positive of that. It's only a cold that ails him, the same as Papa has. You say Papa will get better, and why shouldn't he? Well, I cried, after all, we needn't trouble ourselves. For listen, miss, and mind, I'll keep my word. If you attempt going to Wuthering Heights again, with or without me, I shall inform Mr. Linton, and unless he allow it, the intimacy with your cousin must not be revived. It has been revived, muttered Cathy, sulkily. Must not be continued, then, I said. We'll see, was her reply, and she set off at a gallop, leaving me to toil in the rear. We both reached home before our dinner time. My master supposed we had been wandering through the park, and therefore he demanded no explanation of our absence. As soon as I had entered, I hastened to change my soaked shoes and stockings, but sitting such a while at the Heights had done the mischief. On the succeeding morning I was laid up, and during 3 weeks I remained incapacitated for attending to my duties, a calamity never experienced prior to that period, and never, I am thankful to say, since. My little mistress behaved like an angel in coming to wait on me and cheer my solitude. The confinement brought me exceedingly low. It is wearisome to a stirring, active body, but few have slighter reasons for complaint than I had. The moment Catherine left Mr. Linton's room, she appeared at my bedside. Her day was divided between us. No amusement usurped a minute. She neglected her meals, her studies, and her play, and she was the fondest nurse that ever watched. She must have had a warm heart when she loved her father so, to give so much to me. I said her days were divided between us, but the master retired early, and I generally needed nothing after 6 o'clock. Thus the evening was her own. Poor thing. I never considered what she did with herself after tea, and though frequently, when she looked in to bid me good night, I remarked a fresh color in her cheeks, and a pinkness over her slender fingers, instead of fancying the hues borrowed from a cold ride across the moors, I laid it to the charge of a hot fire in the library. End of chapter 23. All right, so Ellen and Kathy do go to Wuthering Heights to see Linton. And Linton is not doing great and also just very spoiled, and nobody enjoys serving him because Heathcliff is out of the house. Zillah is frequently out of the house, and she's the housekeeper, and Joseph does not enjoy waiting on him. And so they go to see him, and he's sort of aloof and standoffish, and Kathy really just wants him to say that, he's happy that she's there and happy that she did make it, but he's just sort of pouting that the letter stopped, and is sort of complaining also that it was letters and not a visit because he tired himself out from writing such long letters to her. And so they're talking back and forth, and Kathy does get like a little upset, and so she like shoves him, but just like a little bit. But because he's so frail, he just like falls over like off the chair, and it's a whole ordeal. And Ellen picks him back up and puts him like in a different arrangement, so like even if he moves around, he's not just gonna like take a tumble and fall to the ground anymore. And so then there's just silence, and Kathy is waiting for Linton to say, like, I want you to stay, and kind of apologize for being the way that he is, but he doesn't. So Kathy gets up to leave, and Ellen is going to follow, and then he just acts out again. And so basically they leave, and Ellen is saying, like, you can't come anymore. Like, you need to put a stop to this. Your dad is going to be super upset, all of these things. And so Kathy is spending her days divided between her father, Edgar, and Ellen. And Ellen never really put thought to, what she's doing in the evening because Edgar is going to bed so early, and because Ellen doesn't really need anything after tea time. And when Ellen comes into the room, there is evidence that she has left into the cold. Like she has colors in her cheeks and like in her fingers from being outside, but Ellen is just thinking that it's because she has been spending time around the fire. So, little secret meetings are obviously happening. So that's cool. Little secret love. Moving right along. All right. Chapter 24. At the close of 3 weeks, I was able to quit my chamber and move about the house. And on the first occasion of my sitting up in the evening, I asked Catherine to read to me, because my eyes were weak. We were in the library, the master having gone to bed. She consented, rather unwillingly, I fancied, and imagining my sort of books did not suit her, I bid her please herself in the choice of what she perused. She selected one of her own favorites and got forward steadily about an hour. Then came frequent questions. Ellen, are you not tired? Hadn't you better lie down now? You'll be sick keeping up so long, Ellen. No, no, dear, I'm not tired, I returned continually. Perceiving me immovable, she essayed another method of showing her disrelish for her occupation. It changed to yawning and stretching and, Ellen, I'm tired. Give over then and talk, I answered. That was worse. She fretted and sighed and looked at her watch till 8, and finally went to her room, completely overdone with sleep, judging by her peevish, heavy look and the constant rubbing she inflicted on her eyes. The following night she seemed more impatient still, and on the 3rd, from recovering my company, she complained of a headache, and left. I thought her conduct odd, and having remained alone a long while, I resolved on going and inquiring whether she were better, and asking her to come and lie on the sofa, instead of upstairs in the dark. No Catherine could I discover upstairs, and none below. The servants affirmed they had not seen her. I listened at Mr. Edgar's door. All was silence. I returned to her apartment, extinguished my candle, and seated myself in the window. The moon shone bright. A sprinkling of snow covered the ground, and I reflected that she might possibly have taken it into her head to walk about the garden for refreshment. I did detect a figure creeping along the inner fence of the park, but it was not my young mistress. On its emerging into the light, I recognized one of the grooms. He stood a considerable period, viewing the carriage road through the grounds, then started off at a brisk pace, as if he had detected something, and reappeared presently, leading Mrs. Pony. And there she was, just dismounted, and walking by its side. The man took his charge stealthily across the grass towards the stable. Cathy entered by the casement window of the drawing-room, and glided noiselessly up to where I awaited her. She put the door gently to, slipped off her snowy shoes, untied her hat, and was proceeding, unconscious of my espionage, to lay aside her mantle, when I suddenly rose and revealed myself. The surprise petrified her an instant. She uttered an inarticulate exclamation, and stood fixed. "My dear Miss Catherine," I began, too vividly impressed by her recent kindness to break into a scold, "where have you been riding out at this hour? And why should you try to deceive me by telling a tale? Where have you been? Speak." "To the bottom of the park," she stammered. "I didn't tell a tale." "And nowhere else?" I demanded. "No," was the muttered reply. "Oh, Catherine," I cried sorrowfully, "you know what you have been doing wrong, or you wouldn't be driven to uttering an untruth to me. That does grieve me. I'd rather be 3 months ill than hear you frame a deliberate lie." She sprang forward, and bursting into tears, threw her arms round my neck. "Well, Ellen, I'm so afraid of you being angry," she said. "Promise not to be angry, and you shall know the very truth. I hate to hide it." We sat down in the window seat. I assured her I would not scold, whatever her secret might be, and I guessed it, of course. So she commenced. "I've been to Wuthering Heights, Ellen, and I've never missed going a day since you fell ill, except thrice before, and twice after you left your room. I gave Michael books and pictures to prepare Minnie every evening, and to put her back to the stable. You mustn't scold him either, mind. I was at the Heights by 6:30, and generally stayed till 8:30, and then galloped home. It was not to amuse myself that I went. I was often wretched, all the time. Now and then I was happy, once a week, perhaps. At first I expected there would be sad work persuading you to let me keep my word to Linton, for I had engaged to call again next day, when we quitted him, but as you stayed upstairs on the morrow, I escaped that trouble. While Michael was refastening the lock of the park door in the afternoon, I got possession of the key and told him how my cousin wished me to visit him, because he was sick, and couldn't come to the Grange, and how Papa would object to my going, and then I negotiated with him about the pony. He is fond of reading, and he thinks of leaving soon to get married. So he offered, if I would lend him books out of the library, to do what I wished. But I preferred giving him my own, and that satisfied him better. On my second visit, Linton seemed in lively spirits, and Zillah, that is their housekeeper, made us clean room and a good fire, and told us that, as Joseph was out at a prayer meeting, and Catherine Earnshaw was off with his dogs, robbing our woods of pheasants, as I heard afterwards, we might do what we liked. She brought me some warm wine and gingerbread, and appeared exceedingly good-natured, and Linton sat in the armchair, and I in the little rocking-chair on the hearthstone, and we laughed and talked so merrily, and found so much to say. We planned where we would go, and what we would do in summer. I needn't repeat that, because you would call it silly. One time, however, we were near quarrelling. He said the pleasantest manner of spending a hot July day was lying from morning till evening on a bank of heath in the middle of the moors, with the bees humming dreamily about the blooms, and the larks singing high up overhead, and the blue sky and bright sun shining steadily and cloudlessly. That was his most perfect idea of heaven's happiness. Mine was rocking in a rustling green tree, with a west wind blowing, and bright white clouds flitting rapidly above, and not only larks, but throstles, and blackbirds, and linnets, and cuckoos, pouring out music on every side, and the moors seen at a distance, broken into cool, dusky dells, but close by swells of long grass undulating in waves to the breeze, and woods and sounding water, and the whole wide world awake and wild with joy. He wanted all to lie in an ecstasy of peace. I wanted all to sparkle and dance in a glorious jubilee. I said his heaven would be only half alive, and he said mine would be drunk. I said I should fall asleep in his, and he said he could not breathe in mine, and began to grow very snappish. At last we agreed to try both, as soon as the right weather came, and then we kissed each other, and were friends. After sitting still an hour, I looked at the great room with its smooth, uncarpeted floor, and thought how nice it would be to play in, if we removed the table, and I asked Linton to call Zillah in to help us, and we'd have a game at blind man's bluff. She should try to catch us. You used to, you know, Ellen. He wouldn't. There was no pleasure in it, he said, but he consented to play at ball with me. We found two in a cupboard among a heap of old toys, tops and hoops and battledores and shuttlecocks. One was marked C and the other H. I wished to have the C because that stood for Catherine, and the H might be for Heathcliff, his name, but the bran came out of H, and Linton didn't like it. I beat him constantly, and he got cross again and coughed and returned to his chair. That night, though, he easily recovered his good humor. He was charmed with 2 or 3 pretty songs, your songs, Ellen, and when I was obliged to go, he begged and entreated me to come the following evening, and I promised. Minnie and I went flying home as light as air, and I dreamt of Wuthering Heights and my sweet, darling cousin till morning. On the morrow I was sad, partly because you were poorly, and partly because I wished my father knew and approved of my excursions. But it was beautiful moonlight after tea, and as I rode on, the gloom carried. I shall have another happy evening, I thought to myself, and what delights me more, my pretty Linton will. I trotted up their garden, and was turning round to the back, when that fellow Earnshaw met me, took my bridle, and bid me go in by the front entrance. He patted Minnie's neck, and said she was a bonny beast, and appeared as if he wanted me to speak to him. I only told him to leave my horse alone, or else it would kick him. He answered in his vulgar accent, it wouldn't do much hurt if it did, and surveyed his legs with a smile. I was half inclined to make it try. However, he moved off to open the door, and as he raised the latch, he looked up to the inscription above, and said, with a stupid mixture of awkwardness and elation, Miss Catherine, I can read yon now. Wonderful! I exclaimed. Pray let us hear you. You are grown clever. He spelt and drawled over by syllables the name Catherine Earnshaw. And the figures? I cried encouragingly, perceiving that he came to a dead halt. I can't tell them yet, he answered. Oh, you dunce, I said laughingly, heartily at his failure. The fool stared, with a grin hovering about his lips and a scowl gathering over his eyes, as if uncertain whether he might not join in my mirth, whether it was not pleasant familiarity or what it really was, contempt. I settled his doubts by suddenly retrieving my gravity and desiring him to walk away, for I came to see Linton, not him. He reddened. I saw that by the moonlight, dropped his hand from the latch and skulked off, a picture of mortified vanity. He imagined himself to be as accomplished as Linton, I suppose, because he could spell his own name, and was marvellously discomfited that I didn't think the same. "Stop, Miss Catherine, dear," I interrupted. "I shall not scold, but I don't like your conduct here. If you had remembered that Hareton was your cousin as much as Master Heathcliff, you would have felt how improper it was to behave in that way. At least it was praiseworthy ambition for him to desire to be as accomplished as Linton, and probably he did not learn merely to show off. You had made him ashamed of his ignorance before, I have no doubt, and he wished to remedy it and please you. To sneer at his imperfect attempt was very bad breeding. Had you been brought up in his circumstances, would you be less rude? He was as quick and as intelligent as a child as ever you were, and I'm hurt that he should be despised now because that base Heathcliff has treated him so unjustly." "Well, Ellen, you won't cry about it, will you?" she exclaimed, surprised at my earnestness. "But wait, you shall hear if he has conned his ABC to please me, and if it were worth while being civil to the brute." I entered. Linton was lying on the settle, and half got up to welcome me. "I'm ill tonight, Catherine, love," he said, "and you must have all that talk, and let me listen. Come and sit by me. I was sure you wouldn't break your word, and I'll make you promise again before you go." I knew now that I mustn't tease him as he was ill, and I spoke softly and put no questions and avoided irritating him in any way. I had brought some of my nicest books for him. He asked me to read a little of one, and I was about to comply when Earnshaw burst the door open, having gathered venom with reflection. He advanced direct to us, seized Linton by the arm, and swung him off the seat. "Get to thy own room," he said in a voice almost inarticulate with passion, and his face looked swelled and furious. "Take her there if she comes to see thee. Thou shalt, shall not, contraction, shan't. I love it. Thou shan't keep me out of this. Begone, will ye both?" He swore at us, and left Linton no time to answer, nearly throwing him into the kitchen, and he clenched his fist as I followed, seemingly longing to knock me down. I was afraid for a moment, and I let one volume fall. He kicked it after me, and shut us out. I heard a malignant, cracking laugh by the fire, and, turning, beheld that odious Joseph standing rubbing his bony hands and quivering. "I were sure he starved you out. He's a grand lad. He's getting just straight spirit in him. He knaws he knaws as weel as I do who should be to maester yonder. He made it ye skift properly." What? Skift. Jump. Got it. Thank you, footnotes. Linton was white and trembling. He was not pretty then, Ellen. Oh no, he was frightful, for his thin face and large eyes were wrought into an expression of frantic, powerless fury. He grasped the handle of the door and shook it. It was fastened inside. "If you don't let me in, I'll kill you. If you don't let me in, I'll kill you," he rather shrieked than said. "I'll kill you! I'll kill you!" Joseph uttered his croaking laugh again. "There, that's to feyther," he said. "That's feyther. We've all a summat other side of us. Never heed Hareton, lad, dunnot be feared. He cannot get at thee." I took hold of Linton's hand and tried to pull him away, but he shrieked so shockingly that I dared not proceed. At last his cries were choked by a dreadful fit of coughing. Blood gushed from his mouth, and he fell on the ground. I ran into the yard, sick with terror, and he called for Zillah as loud as I could. She soon heard me. She was milking the cows in a shed behind the barn, and hurrying from her work, she inquired what there was to do. I hadn't breath to explain, dragging her in. I looked about for Linton. Earnshaw had come to examine the mischief he had caused, and he was then conveying the poor thing upstairs. Zillah and I ascended after him, but he stopped me at the top of the steps and said I shouldn't go in. I must go home. I exclaimed that he had killed Linton, and I would enter. Joseph locked the door and declared I should do no such stuff, and asked me whether I were ben as to be as mad as him. I stood crying till the housekeeper reappeared. She affirmed he would be better in a bit, but he couldn't do that. He couldn't do with that shrieking and din, and she took me and nearly carried me into the house. Ellen, I was ready to tear my hair off my head. I sobbed and wept so that my eyes were almost blind, and the ruffian you have such sympathy with stood opposite, presuming every now and then to bid me wished, and denying that it was his fault, and finally, frightened by my assertions that I would tell Papa, and that he should be put in prison and hanged, he commenced blubbering himself, and hurried out to hide his cowardly agitation. Still, I was not rid of him. When at length they compelled me to depart, and I had got some 100 yards off the premises, he suddenly issued from the shadow of the roadside, and checked Minnie, and took hold of me. Miss Catherine, I'm ill grieved, he began, but it's rather too bad. I gave him a cut with my whip, thinking perhaps he would murder me. He let go, thundering one of his horrid curses, and I galloped home, more than half out of my senses. I didn't bid you good night that evening, and I didn't go to Wuthering Heights the next. I wished to go exceedingly, but I was strangely excited, and dreaded to hear that Linton was dead, sometimes, and sometimes shuddered at the thought of encountering Hareton. On the third day I took courage, at least. I couldn't bear longer suspense, and stole off once more. I went at 5 o'clock, and walked, fancying I might manage to creep into the house, and look, and up to Linton's room, unobserved, however. The dogs gave notice of my approach. Zillah received me, and saying the lad was mending nicely, showed me into a small, tidy, carpeted apartment, where, to my inexpressible joy, I beheld Linton laid on a little sofa, reading one of my books. But he could neither speak to me nor look at me through a whole hour. Ellen, he has such an unhappy temper, and what quite confounded me, when he did open his mouth, was to utter the falsehood that I had occasioned the uproar, and Hareton was not to blame. Unable to reply, except passionately, I got up and walked from the room. He sent after me a faint Catherine. He did not reckon on being answered so, but I wouldn't turn back, and the morrow was the second day on which I stayed at home, nearly determined to visit him no more. But it was so miserable going to bed and getting up and never hearing anything about him, that my resolution melted into air before it was properly formed. It had appeared wrong to take the journey once. Now it seemed wrong to refrain. Michael came to ask if he must saddle Minnie. I said yes, and considered myself doing a duty as she bore over the hills. I was forced to pass the front windows to get to the court. It was no use trying to conceal my presence. "Young master is in the house," said Zillah, as she saw me making the parlour. I went in. Earnshaw was there also, but he quitted the room directly. Linton sat in the great armchair, half asleep, walking up to the fire. I began in a serious tone, partly meaning it to be true. As you don't like me, Linton, and as you think I come on purpose to hurt you, and pretend I do so every time, this is our last meeting. Let us say good-bye, and tell Mr. Heathcliff that you have no wish to see me, and that he mustn't invent any more falsehoods on the subject." "Sit down and take your hat off, Catherine," he answered. "You are so much happier than I am, you ought to be better. Papa talks enough of my defects and shows enough scorn for me to make it natural I should doubt myself. I doubt whether I am not altogether as worthless as he calls me frequently, and then I feel so cross and bitter. I hate everybody. I am worthless, and bad in temper and bad in spirit, almost always, and if you choose, you may say goodbye. You'll get rid of an annoyance. Only, Catherine, do me this justice. Believe that if I might be as sweet and as kind and as good as you are, I would be, as willingly and more so than as happy and as healthy. And believe that your kindness has made me love you deeper than I deserve your love. And though I couldn't, and cannot help showing my nature to you, I regret it, and repent it, and shall regret and repent it till I die. I felt he spoke the truth, and I felt I must forgive him, and though we should quarrel the next moment, I must forgive him again. We were reconciled, but we cried, both of us, the whole time I stayed, not entirely for sorrow. Yet I was sorry Linton had that distorted nature. He'll never let his friends be at ease, and he'll never be at ease himself. I have always gone to his little parlour since that night, because his father returned the day after. About 3 times, I think, we have been merry and hopeful, as we were the first evening. The rest of my visits were dreary and troubled, now with his selfishness and spite, and now with his sufferings, but I have learned to endure the former with nearly as little resentment as the latter. Mr. Heathcliff purposely avoids me. I have hardly seen him at all. Last Sunday, indeed, coming earlier than usual, I heard him abusing poor Linton cruelly for his conduct of the night before. I can't tell how he knew of it, unless he listened. Linton had certainly behaved provokingly, however. It was the business of nobody but me, and I interrupted Mr. Heathcliff's lecture by entering and telling him so. He burst into a laugh and went away, saying he was glad I took that view of the matter. Since then, I've told Linton he must whisper his bitter things. Now, Helen, you have heard all. I can't be prevented from going to Wuthering Heights, except by inflicting misery on 2 people, whereas, if you'll only not tell Papa, my going need disturb the tranquillity of none. You'll not tell, will you? It will be very heartless if you do. I'll make up my mind on that point by tomorrow, Miss Catherine, I replied. It requires some study, and so I'll leave you to your rest and go think it over. I thought it over aloud, in my master's presence, walking straight from her room to his, and relating the whole story, with the exception of her conversation with her cousin, and any mention of Hareton. Mr. Linton was alarmed and distressed, more than he would acknowledge to me. In the morning, Catherine learned my betrayal of her confidence, and she learned also that her secret visits were to an end. In vain she wept and writhed against the interdict, and implored her father to have pity on Linton. All she got to comfort her was a promise that he would write and give him leave to come to the Grange when he pleased, but explaining that he must no longer expect to see Catherine at Wuthering Heights. Perhaps, had he been aware of his nephew's disposition and state of health, he would have seen fit to withhold even that slight consolation. End of chapter 24. All right, so Catherine has been sneaking out almost every night and seeing Linton, and it seems like most of the time it's not great. Like, nobody's happy from this. Everybody's still pretty miserable, even with these visits, but she insists on visiting. And there's a moment when Hareton walks up to her and shows that he can write his own name, and Catherine just kind of brushes it off and scoffs, and Helen interrupts as she's telling the story to say, look, Hareton is also your cousin, and so you should treat him with the same kindness. And Hareton, like, you upset Hareton before by saying that he couldn't read at all. And now he's like proving that he's learning, and you just brush him off like, that's not cool, that's not nice. And Ellen is like, or Catherine is like, well, just you wait until you hear the rest of my story. And so, of course, Hareton causes chaos because obviously he doesn't know how to not, especially if he's upset. And yeah, so Catherine is just explaining like all of these visits that she's been to, and she's like, I have to keep going. Like, I need to keep going. I can't explain it, blah blah blah. And Ellen is like, all right, I will think about it and I'll let you know tomorrow. And so Ellen does think about it, but she thinks about it out loud, and she thinks about it out loud in front of Edgar's presence. And Edgar, of course, is upset and of course puts an end to the visits, but says that Linton is allowed to write and request that he come and visit. Okay, Linton's health is not amazing. Super frail, super fragile. And if Edgar had known about this, he probably wouldn't have even allowed that. So, cool. Chapter 25. These things happened last winter, sir, said Mrs. Dean, hardly more than a year ago. Last winter I did not think. At another 12 months, and I should be assuming a stranger in the house with relating them. Yet who knows how long you'll be a stranger? You're too young to rest, always contented, living by yourself, and I some way fancy no more. No one could see Catherine Linton and not love her. You smile, but why do you look so lively and interested when I talk about her? And why have you asked me to hang her picture over her fireplace? And why— Stop, my good friend, I cried. It may be possible that I should love her, but would she love me? I doubt it too much to venture my tranquillity by running into temptation, and then my home is not here. I'm of the busy world, and to its arms I must return. Go on. Was Catherine obedient to her father's commands? She was, continued the housekeeper. Her affection for him was still the chief sentiment in her heart, and she spoke without anger. He spoke to the deep tenderness of one about to leave his treasures and amid peril and foes, where his remembered words would be the only aid that he could bequeath to guide her. He said to me, a few days afterwards, I wish my nephew would write Ellen or call. Tell me sincerely what you think of him. Is he changed for the better, or is there a prospect of improvement as he grows a man? It's very delicate, sir, I replied, and scarcely likely to reach manhood, but this I can say. He does not resemble his father, and if Catherine had the misfortune to marry him, he would not be beyond her control, unless she were extremely foolishly indulgent. However, master, you'll have plenty of time to get acquainted with him and see whether he would suit her. It wants 4 years and more to his being of age. Edgar sighed, and walking to the window looked out towards Gimmerton Kirk. It was a misty afternoon, but the February sun shone dimly, and we could just distinguish the 2 fir trees in the yard and the sparely scattered gravestones. I've prayed often, he soliloquized, for the approach of what is coming, and now I begin to shrink and fear it. I thought the memory of the hour I came down that glen a bridegroom would be less sweet than the anticipation that I was soon, in a few months, or possibly weeks, to be carried up and laid in its lonely hollow. Ellen, I've been very happy with my little Cathy. Through winter nights and summer days she was a living hope at my side. But I've been as happy musing by myself among those stones, under that old church, lying through the long June evenings on the green mound of her mother's grave, and wishing, yearning for the time when I might lie beneath it. What can I do for Cathy? How must I quit her? I'm not I'd not care one moment for Linton being Heathcliff's son, nor for his taking her from me, if he could console her for my loss. I'd not care that Heathcliff gained his ends, and triumphed in robbing me of my last blessing. But should Linton be unworthy, only a feeble tool to his father, I cannot abandon her to him. And hard though it be to crush her buoyant spirit, I must persevere in making her sad while I live, and leaving her solitary when I die. Darling, I'd rather resign her to God and lay her in the earth beside me. Resign her to God, as it is, sir, I answered. And if we should lose you, which may he forbid, under his providence, I'll stand her friend and counselor to the last. Miss Catherine is a good girl. I don't fear that she will go willfully wrong, and people who do their duty are always finally rewarded. Spring advanced, yet my master gathered no real strength, though he resumed his walks in the grounds with his daughter. To her inexperienced notions, this itself was a sign of convalescence, and then his cheek was often flushed, and his eyes were bright. She felt sure of his recovery. On her 17th birthday he did not visit the churchyard. It was raining, and I observed, "You'll surely not go out tonight, sir?" He answered, "No, I'll defer it this year a little longer." He wrote again to Linton, expressing his great desire to see him, and, had the invalid been presentable, I've no doubt his father would have permitted him to come. As it was, being instructed, he returned in answer, intimating that Mr. Heathcliff objected to his calling at the Grange, but his uncle's kind remembrance delighted him, and he hoped to meet him sometimes in his rambles, and personally to petition that his cousin and he might not remain long so utterly divided. That part of his letter was simple, and probably his own. Heathcliff knew he could plead eloquently for Catherine's company then. "I do not ask," said he, "that she may visit here, but I am never to see her because my father forbids me to go to her home, and you forbid her to come to mine. Do, now and then, ride with her towards the heights, and let us exchange a few words in your presence. We have done nothing to deserve this separation. And you are not angry with me. You have no reason to dislike me, you allow yourself. Dear uncle, send me a kind note tomorrow, and leave to join you anywhere you please, except at Thrushcross Grange. I believe an interview would convince you that my father's character is not mine. He affirms I am more your nephew than his son, and though I have faults which render me unworthy of Catherine, she has excused them, and for her own sake you should too. You inquire after my health. It is better, but while I remain cut off from all hope and doomed to solitude or the society of those who never did and never will like me, how can I be cheerful and well?" Edgar, though he felt for the boy, could not consent to grant his request, because he could not accompany Catherine. He said, in summer, perhaps, they might meet. Meantime he wished him to continue writing at intervals, and engaged to give him what advice and comfort he was able by letter, being well aware of this hard position in his family. Linton complied, and had he been unrestrained, would probably have spoiled all by filling his epistles with complaints and lamentations. But his father kept a sharp watch over him, and, of course, insisted on every line that my master sent being shown. So instead of penning his peculiar personal sufferings and distresses, the themes constantly uppermost in his thoughts, he harped on the cruel obligation of being held asunder from his friend and love, and gently intimated that Mr. Linton must allow an interview soon, or he should fear he was purposely deceiving him with empty promises. Cathy was a powerful ally at home, and between them they at length persuaded my master to acquiesce in their having a ride or a walk together about once a week under my guardianship, and on the moors nearest the Grange, for June found him still declining. Though she had set aside yearly a portion of his income for my young lady's fortune, he had a natural desire that she might retain, or at least return in a short time to the house of her ancestors, and he considered her only prospect of doing that was by a union with his heir. He had no idea that the latter was failing almost as fast as himself, nor had anyone, I believe. No doctor visited the Heights, and no one saw Master Heathcliff to report on his condition among us. I, for my part, began to fancy my forebodings were false, and that he must be actually rallying when he mentioned riding and walking on the moors, and seemed so earnest in persuading his object. I could not picture a father treating a dying child as tyrannically and wickedly as I afterwards learned Heathcliff had treated him, to compel this apparent eagerness, his efforts redoubling the more imminently his avaricious and unfeeling plans were threatened with defeat by death. End of chapter 25. Okay, so this chapter, Edgar is sickly. Edgar is not doing so well, and so it's just like a whole thing. Like, Heathcliff will not allow Linton to go, and Edgar will not allow Catherine to go over to Wuthering Heights, and so Linton is like, okay, but like, come with us, like, please, like, it will be a chaperoned event, and Edgar's health is declining even more. Cathy thinks that he's getting better because he's starting to take walks around the garden and that he's getting more color in his face, but he's not. And yeah, pretty much it. Yeah. But yeah, that's where we are. Super sad, super depressing, super dramatic. We'll see. We'll see. All right. Doop, doop, doop. Chapter 26. Summer was already past its prime when Edgar reluctantly yielded his assent to their entreaties, and Catherine and I set out on our first ride to join her cousin. It was a close, sultry day, devoid of sunshine, but with a sky too dappled and hazy to threaten rain, and our place of meeting had been fixed at the guidestone by the crossroads. On arriving there, however, a little herd boy, dispatched as a messenger, told us that Maister Linton were just a the side of the Heights, and he'd be mitch obliged to us to gang on a bit further. Well, we'll turn our horses' heads round when we reach him, answered my companion. Our excursion shall lie towards home. But when we reached him, and that was scarcely a quarter of a mile from his own door, we found he had no horse, and we were forced to dismount and leave ours to graze. He lay on the heath, awaiting our approach, and did not rise till we came within a few yards. Then he walked so feebly, and looked so pale, that I immediately exclaimed, "Why, Master Heathcliff, you are not fit for enjoying a ramble this morning. How ill you do look!" Catherine surveyed him with grief and astonishment. She changed the ejaculation of joy on her lips to one of alarm, and the congratulation on their long-postponed meeting to an anxious inquiry whether he were worse than usual. "No, better, he panted, trembling and retaining her hand as if he needed its support, while his big blue eyes wandered timidly over her, the hollowness round them transforming to haggard wildness the languid expression they once possessed. "But you have been worse. persisted his cousin. Worse than when I saw you last. You are thinner, and I'm tired, he interrupted hurriedly. It is too hot for walking. Let us rest here. And in the morning, I often feel sick. Papa says I grow so fast. Badly satisfied, Kathy sat down, and he reclined beside her. There is something like your paradise. This is something like your paradise, said she, making an effort at cheerfulness. You recollect the 2 days we agreed to spend in the place and way each thought pleasantest? This is nearly yours, only there are clouds. But then they are so soft and mellow, it is nicer than sunshine. Next week, if you can, we'll ride down to the Grange Park and try mine. Linton did not appear to remember what she talked of, and he had evidently great difficulty in sustaining any kind of conversation. His lack of interest in the subjects she started and his equal incapacity to contribute to her entertainment were so obvious that she could not conceal her disappointment. An indefinite alteration had come over his whole person and manner. The pettishness that might be caressed into fondness had yielded to a listless apathy. There was less of the peevish temper of a child which frets and teases on purpose to be soothed, and more of the self-absorbed moroseness of a confined invalid, repelling consolation, and ready to regard the ill-humored mirth of others as an insult. Catherine perceived, as well as I did, that he did it rather a punishment than a gratification, to endure our company, and she made no scruple of proposing, presently, to depart. That proposal unexpectedly roused Linton from his lethargy, and threw him into a strange state of agitation. He glanced fearfully towards the heights, begging she would remain another half-hour at least. But I think, said Kathy, you'd be more comfortable at home than sitting here, and I cannot amuse you today. I see, by my tales and songs and chatter, you have grown wiser than I in these 6 months, and you have little taste for my diversions now, or else, if I could amuse you, I'd willingly stay. Stay to rest yourself, he replied, and Catherine, don't think or say that I'm very unwell. It is the heavy weather and heat that makes me dull, and I walked about before you came, a great deal for me. Tell Uncle I'm in tolerable health, will you? I'll tell him that you say so, Linton. I couldn't affirm that you are, observed my young lady, wondering at his pertinacious assertion of what was evidently an untruth. And be here today again next Thursday, continued he, shunning her puzzled gaze, and give him my thanks for permitting you to come. My best thanks, Catherine. And if you did meet my father, and he asked you about me, don't lead him to suppose that I've been extremely silent and stupid. Don't look sad and downcast, as you are doing. He'll be angry. I care nothing for his anger, exclaimed Kathy, imagining she would be its object. But I do, said her cousin, shuddering. Don't provoke him against me, Catherine, for he is very hard. Is he severe to you, Master Heathcliff? Has he gone weary of indulgence and passed from passive to active hatred? Linton looked at me, but did not answer, and after keeping her seat by his side another 10 minutes, during which his head fell drowsily on his breast, and he uttered nothing except suppressed moans of exhaustion or pain, Cathy began to seek solace in looking for bilberries, and sharing the produce of her researches with me. She did not offer them to him, for she saw further notice would only weary and annoy. Is it half an hour now, Ellen? She whispered in my ear at last. I can't tell why we should stay. He's asleep, and Papa will be wanting us back. Well, you must not leave him asleep, I answered. Wait till he wakes, and be patient. You were mighty eager to set off, but your longing to see poor Linton has soon evaporated. Why did he wish to see me? Returned Catherine. In his crossest humours, formerly, I liked him better than I do in his present curious mood. It's just as if it were a task he was compelled to perform, this interview, for fear his father should scold him. But I'm hardly going to come to give Mr. Heathcliff pleasure, whatever reason he may have for ordering Linton to undergo this penance. And though I'm glad he's better in health, I'm sorry he's so much less pleasant, and so much less affectionate to me. You think he is better in health, then? I asked. Oh, yes, she answered, because he always made such a great deal of his sufferings, you know. He is not tolerably well, as he told me to tell papa, but he is better, very likely. There you differ with me, Miss Cathy, I remarked. I should conjecture him to be far worse. Linton here started from his slumber in bewildered terror and asked if anyone had called his name. No, said Catherine, unless in dreams. I cannot conceive how you managed to doze out of doors in the morning. I thought I heard my father, he gasped, glancing up at the frowning nab above us. You are sure nobody spoke? Quite sure, replied his cousin. Only Ellen and I are disputing concerning your health. Are you truly stronger, Linton, than when we separated in winter? If you be, I'm certain one thing is not stronger, your regard for me. Speak, are you? The tears gushed from Linton's eyes as he answered, Yes, yes, I am. And still under the spell of the imaginary voice, his gaze wandered up and down to detect its owner. Cathy rose. For today we must part, she said, and I won't conceal that I have been sadly disappointed with our meeting, though I'll mention it to nobody but you, not that I stand in awe of Mr. Heathcliff. Hush, muttered Linton, for God's sake, hush, he's coming. And he clung to Catherine's arm, striving to detain her. But at that announcement she hastily disengaged herself and whistled to Minnie, who obeyed her like a dog. I'll be here next Thursday, she cried, springing to the saddle. Goodbye. Quick, Ellen. And so we left him, scarcely conscious of our departure, so absorbed was he in anticipating his father's approach. Before we reached home, Catherine's displeasure softened into a perplexed sensation of pity and regret, largely blended with vague, uneasy doubts about Linton's actual circumstances, physical and social, in which I partook, though I counselled her not to say much, for a second journey would make us better judges. My master requested an account of our ongoings. His nephew's offering of thanks was duly delivered, Miss Catherine gently touching on the rest. I also threw little light on his inquiries, for I hardly knew what to hide and what to reveal. End of chapter 26. Okay, super short one. Catherine and Ellen go out to have a meeting with Linton. And Linton is apparently in better health, but is he? They say that he is and that he's stronger, but we're with Ellen and just like having not seen him in a while, just being like, no, you look terrible. You are frail and weak, and like you just fell asleep and you've been overly worked from taking a little walk. Like it seems like you are in chaos. So that's cool. Let's see, what else? And so yeah, they're just talking and falls asleep, and it's been like 30 minutes. And Cathy just like is like, Helen, should we go? And Helen's like, well, we can't leave when he's sleeping. Like that's weird. Wait until he wakes up and then we'll leave. And as like we're leaving or about to leave, Linton is like, please don't say anything to Heathcliff about this being a bad meeting. Please. Please. And so like that little bit of fear like says a lot. you know. You know what I mean? All right. Okay, chapter 27. 7 days glided away, everyone marking its course by the henceforth rapid alteration of Edgar Linton's state. The havoc that months had previously wrought was now emulated by the inroads of hours. Catherine we would fain have deluded yet, but her own quick spirit refused to delude her. It divined in secret, and brooded on the dreadful probability gradually ripening into certainty. She had not the heart to mention her ride when Thursday came round. I mentioned it for her, and obtained permission to order her out of doors, for the library, where her father stopped a short time daily, the brief period he could bear to sit up, and his chamber had become her whole world. She grudged each moment that did not find her bending over his pillow or seated by his side. Her countenance grew wan with watching and sorrow, and my master gladly dismissed her to what he flattered himself would be a happy change of scene and society, drawing comfort from the hope that she would not now be left entirely alone after his death. He had a fixed idea, I guess, by several observations he let fall, that as his nephew resembled him in person, he would resemble him in mind. For Linton's letters bore few or no indications of his defective character, and I, through pardonable weakness, refrained from correcting the error, asking myself what good there would be in disturbing his last moments with information that he had neither power nor opportunity to turn to account. We deferred our excursion until the afternoon, a golden afternoon of August. Each breath from the hills so full of life that it seemed whoever respired it, though dying, might revive. Catherine's face was just like the landscape, shadows and sunshine flitting over it in rapid succession, but the shadows rested longer, and the sunshine was more transient, and her poor little heart reproached itself for even that passing forgetfulness of its cares. We discerned Linton watching at the same spot he had selected before. My young mistress alighted and told me that, as she was resolved to stay a very little while, I had better hold the pony and remain on horseback. But I dissented. I wouldn't risk losing sight of the charge committed to me a minute, so we climbed the slope of Heath together. Master Heathcliff received us with great animation on this occasion, not the animation of high spirits, though, nor yet of joy. It looked more like fear. "It is late," he said, speaking short and with difficulty. "Is not your father very ill? I thought you wouldn't come." "Why? Won't you be candid?" cried Catherine, swallowing her greeting. "Why can't you say at once you don't want me? Is it strange, Linton, that for the second time you have brought me here on purpose, apparently to distress us both, and for no reason besides?" Linton shivered and glanced at her, half supplicating, half ashamed. But his cousin's patience was not sufficient to endure this enigmatical behavior. "My father is very ill," she said. "And why am I called from his bedside? Why didn't you send to absolve me from my promise when you wished I wouldn't keep it? Come, I desire an explanation. Playing and trifling are completely banished out of my mind, and I can't dance attendance on your affectations now." "My affectations," he murmured. "What are they? For heaven's sake, Catherine, don't look so angry. Despise me as much as you please. I am a worthless, cowardly wretch. I can't be scorned enough, but I'm too mean for your anger. Hate my father, and spare me for contempt." "Nonsense!" cried Catherine in a passion. "Foolish, silly boy! And there, he trembles as if I were really going to touch him. You needn't speak contempt, Linton. Anybody will have it spontaneously at your service. Get off. I shall return home. It is folly dragging you from the hearthstone and pretending." "What do we pretend? Let go of my frock. If I pitied you for crying and looking so frightened, you should spurn such pity. Ellen, tell him how disgraceful this conduct is. Rise, and don't degrade yourself in an abject reptile. Don't." With streaming face and expression of agony, Linton had thrown his nerveless frame along the ground. He seemed convulsed with exquisite terror. "Oh," he sobbed, "I cannot bear it. Catherine, Catherine, I am a traitor too, and I dare not tell you. But leave me, and I shall be killed. Dear Catherine, my life is in your hands, and you have said you loved me, and if you did, it wouldn't harm you. You'll not go then, kind, sweet, good Catherine, and perhaps you will consent, and he'll let me die with you." My young lady, on witnessing his intense anguish, stooped to raise him. The old feeling of indulgent tenderness overcame her vexation, and she grew thoroughly moved and alarmed. "Consent to what?" she asked. "To stay? Tell me the meaning of this strange talk, and I will. You contradict your own words and distract me. Be calm and frank, and confess at once all that weighs on your heart. You wouldn't injure me, Linton, would you? You wouldn't let any enemy hurt me, if you could prevent it? I'll believe you are a coward for yourself, but not a coward betrayer of your best friend." "My father threatened me," gasped the boy, clasping his attenuated fingers, "and I dread him. I dare not tell." "Well," said Catherine, with scornful compassion, "keep your secret. I'm no coward. Save yourself. I'm not afraid." Her magnanimity provoked his tears. He wept wildly, kissing her supporting hands, and yet could not summon courage to speak out. I was cogitating what the mystery might be, and determined Catherine should never suffer to benefit him or any one else by my good will, when, hearing a rustle among the ling, I looked up and saw Mr. Heathcliff almost close upon us, descending the heights. He didn't cast a glance towards my companions, though they were sufficiently near to Linton's sobs to be audible. But hailing me in the most hearty tone he assumed to none besides, and the serenity of which I couldn't avoid doubting, he said, "It is something to see you so near my house, Nelly. How are you at the Grange? Let us hear. The rumour goes," he added in a lower tone, "that Edgar Linton is on his deathbed. Perhaps they exaggerate his illness." "No, my master is dying," I replied. "It is true enough. A sad thing it will be for us all, but a blessing for him." "How long will he last, do you think?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "Because," he continued, looking at the two young people who were fixed under his eye, Linton appeared as if he could not venture to stir or raise his head, and Catherine could not move on his account. "Because that lad yonder seems determined to beat me, and I'd thank his uncle to be quick and go before him. Hullo, has the whelp been playing that game long? I did give him some lessons about snivelling. Is he pretty lively with Miss Linton generally?" "Lively? No. He has shown the greatest distress," I answered. "To see him, I should say, that instead of rambling with his sweetheart on the hills, he ought to be in bed under the hands of a doctor." "He shall be, in a day or two," murmured Heathcliff. "But first, get up, Linton. Get up. Don't grovel on the ground there. Up, this moment." Linton had sunk prostrate again in another paroxysm of helpless fear, caused by his father's glance towards him, I suppose. There was nothing else to produce such humiliation. He made several efforts to obey, but his little strength was annihilated for the time, and he fell back again with a moan. Mr. Heathcliff advanced and lifted him to lean against a ridge of turf. "Now," said he, with curbed ferocity, "I'm getting angry, and if you don't command that paltry spirit of yours, damn you, get up directly." "I will, father," he panted. "Only let me alone, or I shall faint. I've done as you wished, I'm sure. Catherine will tell you that I have been cheerful." keep by me, Catherine. Give me your hand." "Take mine," said his father. "Stand on your feet. There now. She'll lend you her arm. That's right. Look at her. You would imagine I was the devil himself. Miss Linton, to excite such horror. Be so kind as to walk home with him, will you? He shudders if I touch him." "Linton, dear," whispered Catherine, I can't go to Wuthering Heights. Papa has forbidden me. He'll not harm you. Why are you so afraid?" "I can never re-enter that house," he answered. "I'm not to re-enter it without you." "Stop!" cried his father. "We'll respect Catherine's filial scruples. Nelly, take him in, and I'll follow your advice concerning the doctor without delay." "You'll do well," replied I. "But I must remain with my mistress. To mind your son is not my business." "You are very stiff," said Heathcliff. "I know that. But you'll force me to pinch the baby and make it scream before it moves your charity. Come then, my hero. Are you willing to return escorted by me?" He approached once more, and made as if he would seize the fragile being, but, shrinking back, Linton clung to his cousin and implored her to accompany him with a frantic importunity that admitted no denial. However I disapproved, I couldn't hinder her. Indeed, how could she have refused him herself? What was filling him with dread we had no means of discerning. But there he was, powerless under its gripe, and any addition seemed capable of shocking him into idiocy. We reached the threshold. Catherine walked in, and I stood waiting till she had conducted the invalid to a chair, expecting her out immediately, when Mr. Heathcliff, pushing me forward, exclaimed, "My house is not stricken with the plague, Nelly, and I have a mind to be hospitable today. Sit down, and allow me to shut the door." He shut and locked it also. I started. "You shall have tea before you go home," he said. "I am by myself. Hareton is gone with some cattle to the Leas, and Zillah and Joseph are off on a journey of pleasure, and, though I'm used to being alone, I'd rather have some interesting company if I can get it. Miss Linton, take your seat by him. I give you what I have. The present is hardly worth accepting, but I have nothing else to offer. It is Linton, I mean. How she does stare! It's odd what a savage feeling I have to anything that seems afraid of me. Had I been born where laws are less strict and tastes less dainty, I should treat myself to a slow vivisection of those two, as an evening's amusement." He drew in his breath, struck the table, and swore to himself. "By hell, I hate them!" "I'm not afraid of you," exclaimed Catherine. You could not hear the latter part of her speech. She stepped close up, her black eyes flashing with passion and resolution. "Give me that key. I will have it," she said. "I couldn't eat or drink here if I were starving." Heathcliff had the key in his hand that remained on the table. He looked up, seized with a sort of surprise at her boldness, or possibly reminded, by her voice and glance, of the person from whom she inherited it. She snatched at the instrument, and half succeeded in getting it out of his loosened fingers, but her action recalled him to the present. He recovered it speedily. "Now, Catherine Linton," he said, "stand off, or I shall knock you down, and that will make Mrs. Dean mad." Regardless of this warning, she captured his closed hand and its contents again. "We will go," she repeated, exerting her utmost effort to cause the iron muscles to relax, and finding that her nails made no impression, she applied her teeth pretty sharply. Heathcliff glanced at me, a glance that kept me from interfering a moment. Catherine was too intent on his fingers to notice his face. He opened them suddenly, and resigned the object of dispute. But ere she had well secured it, he seized her with the liberated hand, and, pulling her on his knee, administered with the other a shower of terrific slaps on both sides of the head, each sufficient to have fulfilled his threat, had she been able to fall. This diabolical violence, I rushed on him furiously. "You villain!" I began to cry. "You villain!" A touch on the chest silenced me. I am stout, and soon put out of breath, and what with that and the rage, I staggered dizzily back, and felt ready to suffocate or to burst a blood vessel. The scene was over in 2 minutes. Catherine, released, put her 2 hands to her temples and looked just as if it were not sure whether her ears were off or on. She trembled like a reed, poor thing, and leant against the table, perfectly bewildered. "I know how to chastise children, you see," said the scoundrel grimly, as he stooped to repossess himself of the keys which had dropped to the floor. "Go to Linton now, as I told you, and cry at your ease. I shall be your father tomorrow, all the father you'll have in a few days, and you shall have plenty of that. You can bear plenty. You're no weakling. You shall have a daily taste, if I catch such a devil of a temper in your eyes again." Kathy ran to me instead of Linton, and knelt down and put her burning cheek on my lap, weeping aloud. Her cousin had shrunk into a corner of the settle, as quiet as a mouse, congratulating himself, I dare say, that the correction had alighted on another than him. Mr. Heathcliff, perceiving us all confounded, rose and expeditiously made the tea himself. The cups and saucers were laid ready. He poured it out and handed me a cup. "Wash away your spleen," he said, "and help your own naughty pet and mine. It is not poisoned, though I prepared it. I'm going out to seek your horses." Our first thought on his departure was to force an exit somewhere. We tried the kitchen door, but that was fastened outside. We looked at the windows. They were too narrow for even Cathy's little figure. "Master Linton," I cried, seeing we were regularly imprisoned, "you know what your diabolical is after, and you shall tell us, or I'll box your ears, as he has done your cousin's." "Yes, Linton, you must tell," said Catherine. "It was for your sake I came, and it will be wickedly ungrateful if you refuse." "Give me some tea. I am thirsty, and then I'll tell you," he answered. "Mrs. Dean, go away. I don't like you standing over me. Now, Catherine, you are letting your tears fall into my cup. I won't drink that. Give me another." Catherine pushed another to him and wiped her face. I felt disgusted at the little wretch's composure, since he was no longer in terror for himself. The anguish he had exhibited on the moor subsided as soon as ever we entered Wuthering Heights. So I guessed he had been menaced with an awful visitation of wrath as he failed in decoying us there. And, that accomplished, we had no further immediate fears. "Papa wants us to be married," he continued, after sipping some of the liquid. "And he knows your papa wouldn't let us marry now, and he's afraid of my dying if we wait. So we are to be married in the morning, and you are to stay here all night. And if you do as he wishes, you shall return home next day and take me with you." "Take you with her, pitiful changeling!" I exclaimed. "You marry? Why, the man is mad, or he thinks us foolish, every one. And do you imagine that beautiful young lady, that healthy, hardy girl, will tie herself to a little perishing monkey like you? Are you cherishing the notion that anybody, let alone Miss Catherine Linton, would have you for a husband? You want whipping for bringing us in here at all, with your dastardly pulling tricks, and don't look so silly now. I've a very good mind to shake you severely for your contemptible treachery, and your imbecile conceit. I did give him a slight shaking, but it brought on the cough, and he took to his ordinary resource of moaning and weeping, and Catherine rebuked me. "Stay all night? No," she said, looking slowly round. "Ellen, I'll burn that door down, but I'll get out." And she would have commenced the execution of her threat directly, but Linton was up in alarm for his dear self again. He clasped her in his 2 feeble arms, sobbing. Won't you have me and save me? Not let me come to the Grange? Oh, darling Catherine, you mustn't go and leave after all. You must obey my father. You must. I must obey my own, she replied, and relieve him from this cruel suspense. The whole night. What would he think? He'll be distressed already. I'll either break or burn away out of this house. Be quiet. You're in no danger, but if you hinder me, Linton, I love Papa better than you. The mortal terror he felt of Mr. Heathcliff's anger restored to the boy his coward's eloquence. Catherine was near distraught. Still, she persisted that she must go home, and tried entreaty in her turn, persuading him to subdue his selfish agony. While they were thus occupied, our jailer re-entered. Your beasts have trotted off, he said. And now, Linton, snivelling again, what has she been doing to you? Come, come, have done and gone to bed, and get to bed. In a month or two, my lad, you'll be able to pay her back her present tyrannies with a rigorous hand. You are pining for pure love, are you not? Nothing else in the world, and she shall have you. There, to bed. Zillah won't be here tonight, you must undress yourself. Hush, hold your nose, once in your own room. I'll not come near you, you needn't fear. But chance, you've managed tolerably. I'll look to the rest. He spoke these words, holding the door open for his son to pass, and the latter achieved his exit exactly as a spaniel might, which suspected the person who attended on it of designing a spiteful squeeze. The lock was re-secured. Heathcliff approached the fire, where my mistress and I stood silent. Catherine looked up and instinctively raised her hand to her cheek. His neighborhood revived a painful sensation. Anybody else would have been incapable of regarding the childish act of sternness, but he scowled on her and muttered, "You not afraid of me? Your courage is well disguised. You seem damnably afraid." "I am afraid now," she replied, "because if I stay, Papa will be miserable, and how can I endure making him miserable when he... Mr. Heathcliff, let me go home. I promised to marry Linton. Papa would like me to, and I love him. Why should you wish to force me to do what I'm willing to do myself?" "Let him dare to force you," I cried. "There's law in the land, thank God. Though we be in an out-of-way place, I'd inform if he were my own son, and it's felony without benefit of clergy." "Silence," said the ruffian. "To the devil with your clamour. I don't want you to speak. Miss Linton, I shall enjoy myself remarkably in thinking your father will be miserable. I shall not sleep for satisfaction. You could have hit on no surer way of fixing your residence under my roof for the next 24 hours than informing me that such an event would follow. As to your promise to marry Linton, I'll take care you shall keep it, for you shall not quit this place till it is fulfilled." "Send Ellen, then, to let Papa know that I'm safe," exclaimed Catherine, weeping bitterly. "Or marry me now. Poor Papa! Ellen, he'll think we're lost. What shall we do?" "Not he. He'll think you are tired of waiting on him, and run off for a little amusement," answered Heathcliff. "You cannot deny that you entered my house on your own accord, in contempt of his injunctions to the contrary, and it is quite natural that you should desire amusement at your age, and that you should weary of nursing a sick man, and that man only your father. Catherine, his happiest days for coming into the world, I did at last. And it would just do if he cursed you as he went out of it. I'd join him. I don't love you. How could I? Weep away. As far as I can see, it will be your chief diversion hereafter, unless Linton make amends for other losses, and your provident parent appears to fancy he may. His letters of advice and consolation entertain me vastly. In his last he recommended my jewel to be careful of his, and kind to her when he got her. Careful and kind. That's paternal. Not Linton, but Linton requires his whole stock of care and kindness for himself. Linton can play the little tyrant well. He'll undertake to torture any number of cats if their teeth be drawn and their claws pared. You'll be able to tell his uncle fine tales of his kindness when you get home, I assure you." "You're right there," I said. "Explain your son's character, show his resemblance to yourself, and then, I hope, Miss Cathy will think twice before she takes the cockatrice." Meaning marrying the poisonous creature. Yeah. Okay. "I don't much mind speaking of his amiable qualities now," he answered, "because she must either accept him or remain a prisoner, and you along with her, till your master dies. I can detain you both quite concealed here. If you doubt, encourage her to retract her word, and you'll have an opportunity of judging." "I'll not retract my word," said Catherine. "I'll marry him within this hour, if I may go to Thrushcross Grange afterwards. Mr. Heathcliff, you're a cruel man, but you're not a fiend, and you won't, from mere malice, destroy irrevocably all my happiness. If papa thought I had left him on purpose, and if he died before I returned, could I bear to live? I've given over crying, but I'm going to kneel here at your knee, and I'll not give up. I'll not take my eyes from your face till you look back at me. No, don't turn away. Do look. You'll see nothing to provoke you. I don't hate you. I'm not angry that you struck me. Have you never loved anybody in all your life, uncle? Never? You must look once. I'm so wretched, you can't help being sorry and pitying me. Keep your F's fingers off," meaning like lizard or newt, "and move, or I'll kick you," cried Heathcliff, brutally repulsing her. "I'd rather be hugged by a snake. How the devil can you dream of fawning on me? I detest you." He shrugged his shoulders, shook himself, indeed, as if his flesh crept with aversion, and thrust back his chair, while I got up and opened my mouth to commence a downright torrent of abuse. But I was rendered dumb in the middle of my first sentence by a threat that I should be shown into a room by myself the very next syllable I uttered. It was growing dark. We heard a sound of voices at the garden gate. Our host hurried out instantly. He had his wits about him. We did not. There was a talk of 2 or 3 minutes, and he returned, alone. "I thought it had been your cousin Hareton," I observed Catherine. "I wish he would arrive. Who knows but he might take your part?" "It was 3 servants sent to seek you from the Grange," said Heathcliff, overhearing me. "You should have opened a lattice and called out, but I could swear that Chit is glad you didn't. She's glad to be obliged to stay, I'm certain." At learning the chance we had missed, we both gave vent to our grief without control, and he allowed us to wail on till 9 o'clock. Then he bid us go upstairs, through the kitchen, to Zilla's chamber, and I whispered my companion to obey. Perhaps we might contrive to get through the window there, or into a garret, and out by its skylight. The window, however, was narrow, like those below, and the garret trap was safe from our attempts, for we were fastened in as before. We neither of us lay down. Catherine took her station by the lattice, and watching anxiously for morning, a deep sigh being the only answer I could obtain to my frequent entreaties that she would try to rest. I seated myself in a chair and rocked to and fro, passing harsh judgment on my many derelictions of duty, from which, it struck me then, all the misfortunes of my employers sprang. It was not the case in reality, I am aware, but it was, in my imagination, that dismal night, and I thought Heathcliff himself less guilty than I. At 7 o'clock he came, and inquired if Miss Linton had risen. She ran to the door immediately, and answered, "Yes." Here and then, he said, opening it, and pulling her out. I rose to follow, but he turned the lock again. I demanded my release. Be patient, he replied. I'll send up your breakfast in a while. I thumped on the panels and rattled the latch angrily, and Catherine asked why I was still shut up. He answered, I must try to endure it another hour, and they went away. I endured it 2 or 3 hours. At length I heard a footstep, but not Heathcliff's. I've brought you something to eat, said a voice. Opened a door. Complying eagerly, I beheld Hareton, laden with food enough to last me all day. Take it, he added, thrusting the tray into my hand. Stay 1 minute, I began. Nay, he cried, and retired, regardless of any prayers I could put forth to detain him. And there I remained enclosed the whole day, and the whole of the next night, and another, and another. 5 nights and 4 days I remained, altogether seeing nobody but Hareton, once every morning, and he was a model of a jailer, surly and dumb, and deaf to every attempt at moving his sense of justice or compassion. End of chapter 27. All right, so it is the next week, and it is time for Catherine to go and see Linton again. And so they go, and they're chatting again, and Linton again is in not a great mood, and Heathcliff shows up, and he has wrangled them into his house willingly, and he is basically detaining them because he needs Linton and Catherine to marry, and he knows that Edgar will not allow it while Edgar is alive. So he's waiting for Edgar to die and keeping them separate. And Catherine just has promised so many different times in so many different ways that if she is allowed to go home, she will marry him within the hour. And that doesn't happen. And so they stay the night. They're led upstairs into a room that is locked from the outside. And the next day, Heathcliff comes and he takes Catherine away and leaves Ellen there. And Ellen stays there for days, for 5 days, for 5 nights and 4 days. And that is just insane. Insane. All right. Last chapter of the night. Chapter 28. On the 5th morning, or rather afternoon, a different step approached, lighter and shorter, and this time the person entered the room. It was Zillah, donned in her scarlet shawl, with a black silk bonnet on her head, and a willow basket swung to her arm. Ah, dear Mrs. Dean, she exclaimed. Well, there is talk about you at Gimmerton. I never thought but you were sunk in the Black Horse Marsh, and Missy with you, till master told me you'd been found, and he'd lodged you here. What? And you must have got on. In Ireland, for sure. And how long were you in the hole? Did master save you, Mrs. Dean? But you're not so thin. You've been so poorly, have you? Your master is a true scoundrel, I replied, but he shall answer for it. He needn't have raised that tale. It shall all be laid bare. What do you mean? Asked Zillah. It's not his tale. They tell that in the village, about your being lost in the marsh, and I calls to Earnshaw when I come in. That's odd thing, Mr. Hareton, happened since I went off. It's a sad pity of that likely young lass, and can't Nelly Dean. He stared. I thought he had not heard aught, and so I told him the rumour. The master listened, and he just smiled to himself and said, If they have been in the marsh, they are out now, Zillah. Nelly Dean is lodged at this minute in your room. You can tell her to flit when you go up. Here is the key. The bog water got into her head, and she won't have run home quite flighty. But I fixed her till she came round to her senses. You can bid her go to the Grange at once, if she be able, and carry a message from me that her young lady will follow in time to attend the squire's funeral." "Mr. Edgar is not dead?" I gasped. "Oh, Zillah, Zillah! No, no, sit down, my good mistress," she replied. "You're right sickly yet. He's not dead. Dr. Kenneth thinks he may last another day. I met him on the road and asked." Instead of sitting down, I snatched my outdoor things and hastened below, for the way was free. On entering the house, I looked about for someone to give information of Catherine. The place was filled with sunshine, and the door stood wide open, but nobody seemed at hand. As I hesitated whether to go off at once or return and seek my mistress, a slight cough drew my attention to the hearth. Linton lay on the settle, sole tenant, sucking a stick of sugar-cane, and pursuing my movements with apathetic eyes. "Where is Miss Catherine?" I demanded sternly, supposing I could frighten him into giving intelligence by catching him thus alone. He sucked on like an innocent. "Is she gone?" I asked. "No," he replied. "She's upstairs. She's not to go. We won't let her." "You won't let her, little idiot!" I exclaimed. "Direct me to her room immediately, or I'll make you sing out sharply." "Papa would make you sing out, if you attempted to get there," he answered. "He says I'm not to be soft with Catherine. She's my wife, and it's shameful that she should wish to leave me. He says she hates me, and wants me to die, and that she may have my money. But she shan't have it, and she shan't go home. She never shall. She may cry and be sick as much as she pleases." He resumed his formal occupation, closing his lids as if he meant to droop asleep. "Master Heathcliff," I resumed, "have you forgotten all Catherine's kindness to you last winter, when you affirmed you loved her, and when she brought you books and sung you songs, and came many a time through wind and snow to see you? She wept to miss one evening, because you would be disappointed, and you felt then that she was 100 times too good to you, and now you believe the lies your father tells, though you know he detests you both, and you join him against her. That's fine gratitude, is it not?" The corner of Linton's mouth fell, and he took the sugar-cane from his lips. "Did she come to Wuthering Heights because she hated you?" I continued. "Think for yourself. As to your money, she does not even know that you will have any. And you say she's sick, and yet you leave her alone up there in a strange house, you, who have felt what it is to be so neglected. You could pity your own sufferings, and she pitied them too. You would, but you won't pity hers. I shed tears, Master Heathcliff. You see, an elderly woman, and a servant merely, and you, after pretending such affection and having reason to worship her almost, store every tear you have for yourself, and lie there, quite at ease. You're a heartless, selfish boy." "Can't stay with her," he answered crossly. "I'll not stay by myself. She cries so I can't bear it, and she won't give over, though I say I'll call my father. I did call him once, and he threatened to strangle her if she was not quiet. But she began again the instant he left the room, moaning and grieving all night long, though I screamed for vexation that I couldn't sleep." "Is Mr. Heathcliff out?" I inquired, perceiving that the wretched creature had no power to sympathize with the cousin's mental tortures. "He's in the court," he replied, "talking to Dr. Kenneth, who says uncle is dying, truly, at last. I'm glad, for I shall be master of the Grange after him. Catherine always spoke of it as her house. It isn't hers. It's mine. She offered to give me them and her pretty birds and her pony Minnie if I would get the key to our room and let her out. But I told her she had nothing to give. They were all mine. And then she cried and took a little picture from her neck and said I would have that. 2 pictures in a gold case, on one side her mother, and the other her uncle, when they were young. That was yesterday, and I said they were mine too, and tried to get them from her. The spiteful thing wouldn't let me. She pushed me off and hurt me. I shrieked out. That frightens her. She heard Papa coming, and she broke the hinges and divided the case, and gave me her mother's portrait. The other she attempted to hide, but Papa asked what was the matter, and I explained it. He took the one I had away, and ordered her to resign hers to me. She refused, and he struck her down, and wrenched it off the chain, and crushed it with his foot. "And are you pleased to see her struck?" I said, having my designs in encouraging his talk. I winked, meaning there's a footnote here, and I was like, you winked? You were just like, hey, you just got hit. No. Ignored. Turned a blind eye. Glanced away. There we go. I winked, he answered. I winked to see my father strike a dog or a horse. He does it so hard. Yet I find at first she deserves punishing for punishing me. But when Papa was gone, she made me come to the window and showed me her cheek cut on the inside against her teeth, and her mouth filling with blood. And then she gathered up the bits of the picture and went and sat down with her face to the wall, and she has never spoken to me since. And I sometimes think she can't speak for pain. I don't like to think so, but she's a naughty thing for crying continually, and she looks so pale and wild. I'm afraid of her. "And you can get the key, if you choose," I said. "Yes, when I'm upstairs," he answered. "But I can't walk up the stairs now." "What apartment is it?" I asked. "Oh," he cried, "I shan't tell you where it is. It is our secret. Nobody, neither Hareton nor Zillah, is to know. There, you've tired me. Go away. Go away." And he turned his face onto his arm and shut his eyes again. I considered it best to depart without seeing Mr. Heathcliff, and bring a rescue for my young lady from the Grange. On reaching it, the astonishment of my fellow servants to see me, and their joy also, was intense. And when they heard that their little mistress was safe, 2 or 3 were about to hurry up and shout the news to Mr. Edgar's door, but I bespoke the announcement of it myself. How changed I found him, even in those few days! He lay an image of sadness and resignation, awaiting his death. Very young he looked, though his actual age was 39. One would have called him 10 years younger, at least. He thought of Catherine, for he murmured her name. I touched his hand and spoke. "Catherine is coming, dear master," I whispered. "She is alive and well, and will be here, I hope, tonight." I trembled at the first effects of this intelligence. He half rose up, looked eagerly around the apartment, and then sank back in a swoon. As soon as he recovered, I related our compulsory visit and detention at the Heights. I said Heathcliff forced me to go in, which was not quite true. I uttered as little as possible against Linton, nor did I describe all his father's brutal conduct, my intentions being to aid no bitterness, but I could help it. But if I could help it, to his already overflowing cup. He divined that one of his enemy's purposes was to secure the personal property, as well as the estate, to his son, or rather himself. Yet why he did not wait till his decease was a puzzle to my master, because ignorant how nearly he and his nephew would quit the world together. However, he felt that his will had better be altered, instead of leaving Catherine's fortune at her own disposal. He determined to put it in the hands of trustees for her use during life, and for her children, if she had any after her. By his means, it could not fall to Mr. Heathcliff, should Linton die. Having received his orders, I dispatched a man to fetch the attorney, and 4 more, provided with serviceable weapons, to demand my young lady and of her jailer. Both parties were delayed very late. The single servant returned first. He said Mr. Green, the lawyer, was out when he arrived at his house, and he had to wait 2 hours for his re-entrance, and then Mr. Green told him he had a little business in the village that must be done, but he would be at Thrush Cross Grange before morning. The 4 men came back unaccompanied also. They brought word that Catherine was ill, too ill to quit her room, and Heathcliff would not suffer them to see her. I scolded the stupid fellows well for listening to that tale, which I would not carry to my master, resolving to take a whole bevy up to the heights at daylight and storm it literally. Unless the prisoner were quietly surrendered to us, her father shall see her, I vowed, and vowed again, if that devil be killed on his own doorstones in trying to prevent it. Happily, I spared the journey and the trouble. I had gone downstairs at 3 o'clock to fetch a jug of water, and was passing through the hall with it in my hand, when a sharp knock at the door made me jump. "Oh, it is Green," I said, recollecting myself. "Only Green." And I went on, intending to send somebody else to open it, but the knock was repeated, not loud, and still importunately. I put the jug on the banister and hastened to admit him myself. The harvest moon shone clear outside. It was not the attorney. My own sweet little mistress sprang on my neck, sobbing. "Ellen, Ellen, is papa alive?" "Yes," I cried. "Yes, my angel, he is. God be thanked you are safe and with us again." She wanted to run, breathless as she was, upstairs to Mr. Linton's room, but I compelled her to sit down on a chair and make her drink, and wash her pale face, chafing it into a faint colour with my apron. Then I said I must go first and tell of her arrival, imploring her to say she should be happy with young Heathcliff. She stared, but soon comprehending why I counselled her to utter the falsehood, she assured me she would not complain. I couldn't abide to be present at their meeting. I stood outside the chamber door a quarter of an hour, and hardly ventured near the bed then. All was composed, however. Catherine's despair was as silent as her father's joy. She supported him calmly in appearance, and he fixed on her features his raised eyes that seemed dilating with ecstasy. "He died blissfully, Mr. Lockwood. He died so." Kissing her neck, he murmured, "I am going to her, and you, darling child, shall come to us," and never stirred or spoke again, but continued that rapt, radiant gaze till his pulse imperceptibly stopped and his soul departed. None could have noticed the exact moment of his death, it was so entirely without a struggle. Whether Catherine had spent her tears, or whether the grief was too weighty to let them flow, she sat there, dry-eyed, till the sun rose, and she sat till noon, and would have remained brooding over that deathbed, but I insisted on her coming away and taking some repose. It was well I succeeded in removing her, for at dinner-time appeared the lawyer, having called at Wuthering Heights to get his instructions how to behave. He had sold himself to Mr. Heathcliff. That was the cause of his delay in obeying my master's summons. Fortunately, no thought of worldly affairs crossed the latter's mind to disturb him after his daughter's arrival. Mr. Green took upon himself to order everything and everybody about the place. Hinder that, and my loud protestations against any infringement of its directions. The funeral was hurried over. Catherine, Mrs. Linton Heathcliff now, was suffered to stay at the Grange till her father's corpse had quitted it. She told me that her anguish had at last spurred Linton to incur the risk of liberating her. She heard the men I sent disputing at the door, and she gathered the sense of Heathcliff's answer. It drove her desperate. Linton, who had been conveyed up to the little parlour soon after I left, was terrified into fetching the key before his father reascended. He had the cunning to unlock and relock the door without shutting it. And when he should have gone to bed, he begged to sleep with Hareton, and his position was granted for once. Catherine stole out before break of day. She dared not try the door lest the dogs should raise an alarm. She visited the empty chambers and examined their windows, and, luckily, lighting on her mother's, she got easily out of its lattice, and on the ground, by means of a fir tree close by. Her accomplice suffered for his share in the escape, notwithstanding his timid contrivances. End of chapter 28. Okay, so this chapter, up. Ellen does get out. Zilla shows up and is like, "Oh, you're here. Like, we heard so many stories in the village about you having been sunk in the marsh." And yeah, that obviously didn't happen. And so she leaves, and as she's leaving, Linton, the little jerk, is sitting there eating a sugar cane, and Ellen is like, "Okay, where's Catherine? Like, did she already leave? Like, where is she?" And he's like, "Oh no, she's upstairs." Ugh, stupid girl. All she does is cry, and I just can't be in her presence anymore. All she does is cry, 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 and I threatened to bring my dad in, and once he came and he hit her, and like, you know, she's kind of a nuisance. And Ellen is like, "Dude, she was so nice to you. What are you talking about? Why are you being like this? Like, what?" And like, Heathcliff has convinced Linton that Ellen is just after his money and just doesn't really love him and all of these things, and she just wants to leave him and whatever, and so like he needs to put her in her place and just terrible untrue things. And so Ellen is able to leave, and she goes back to Wuthering Heights and sends out people or back to Thrushcross Grange and sends out people from there to Wuthering Heights to help Catherine escape. And it doesn't work. Heathcliff is like, "Oh no, she's not here. Like, everything's fine." And while this is all happening, Edgar's health is just terrible. So terrible. He's on his deathbed. It's awful. And finally, finally, uh, Catherine makes it. And she goes upstairs and she is just a mess, of course. I'm sure wishing that she could have been here sooner, being with her dad and all of these things. And she goes up to him, like hugs him, and he is so happy to see her. And his last words are like, "I'm leaving. Gonna go be with your mom, and we'll wait for you. Like, you'll follow us soon." And it's just sad. It's just so sad. Hate it. I hate it so much. I just, mm, mm, mm. And like, I don't, I mean, it's all about control, I guess. Well, my sentences aren't even forming. That's how worked up I am. It's all about control, but it's just like, okay, she already said that she would marry Linton. Like, you don't need to coerce her into doing it. She already said it. She just wanted to go home to like be with her ailing father. Like, come on. Come on. You don't have to like lord that over somebody. Don't be terrible in many different forms. Maybe just pick like one or two. You don't have to be terrible in all of them. So, yeah. And that's where we left off, was his death, and it's very sad. Oh, and Mr. Green. Oh, so before Catherine made it in, Edgar was trying to get a lawyer to like ensure that everything would be going to Catherine and nothing would be like tied up or anything like that. But of course that didn't happen, and he didn't want to bother Catherine like when she was there and like bring her into all of this. And the funeral was a speedy one, and there was like discussion over like where he should be buried, but thankfully that was written in the will of where he should be, so they couldn't like go against that. But yes, that's going to be where we end for the night. We will pick up next week, right where we left off, on chapter 29. And we're going to finish. We're going to finish, my friends. We only have this much to go. We're finishing. We're doing it next week. Amazing. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you all for being here tonight. It is a pleasure, as always. Whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate you, and I 1000% appreciate your support. If I do not see you next time, I hope to see you very soon. Goodbye.